Okay, welcome everybody today to our event, which is the effective integration of management into the engineering curriculum. My name is Dr. Amy Byrne. I'm from TU Dublin and a lecturer there. I'm also head of the Bio and Circular Economies Research Group and part of the Academic Society here. Today's event has been organised between the Academic Society and the Business and Executive Society. So I've organised it along with Hann, who's sitting at the back there, from the Academic Society, and then from the Executive and Business Society, we have Jim and Kathy as well. So just a small bit of housekeeping. Fire exit is over here and at the back as well. And if you go up these stairs and back outside around. Other things are, we are recording today's event, but the Q&A session won't be recorded. It will still go live out online. If anyone online has any questions, can you please post them into the Q&A chat as opposed to the chat portion. So it's just Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So we have a very impressive lineup for you today. But first I'm going to introduce the chairs of the two societies. First up, we have Kathy O'Leary, who is chair of the Business and Executive Society and also head of Occupational Health and Safety in BAM Ireland. She's a chartered engineer and fellow of Engineers Ireland, and she commenced her career in the UK as a design engineer, but then transferred to the construction industry where she has been ever since. She's worked on commercial and infrastructure projects in the UK, Australia and Ireland as contract manager before taking up her current role.
Thank you, Amy. So you're all very welcome to this joint event. It's great to have a collaboration between the two societies. Just a little bit about the Executive and Business Society. Our society is for senior engineers who hold executive or management positions to foster a leadership development community through networking, CPD activities and advocacy. We will be hosting other events over the rest of 2023, so I would urge you to follow the society on LinkedIn to keep up to date with future events. And now I'll hand you over to the chair of the Academic Society.
And just to introduce Kevin, he is the chair of the Academic Society and he's also program chair for TU Dublin's Level 8 Mechanical Engineering program. He's also educational developer for the Convene project, which focuses on supporting higher education to meet the needs of enterprise. So very relevant for this.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Amy. So my name is Kevin Delaney, and I'm the chairperson of the Academic Society for this academic year. The Academic Society is a networking organisation in Engineers Ireland, and it is primarily open to academics right across Ireland, regardless of whether they're members of Engineers Ireland or not. And it's an opportunity to try and help further the engineering education within Ireland. This is one of a series of webinars that we run, and it's really important as it's such an important program outcome for engineers in terms of understanding management. So I'd like to pass back to Amy now, and I'm really looking forward to the talks this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So we'll move on to our speakers now. Our first speaker is Richard Manton, Dr. Richard Manton, who holds a PhD from NUI Galway and is interim registrar at Engineers Ireland. He's responsible for accreditation, registration and regulation. He previously led Engineers Ireland's research policy and public affairs and has represented the profession to Oireachtas committees, World Bank and the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thanks to the Academic Society and the Executive and Business Society for the opportunity to talk to you about our accreditation standard, particularly our new accreditation criteria related to engineering management. So before I go into engineering management specifically, I just really want to introduce our accreditation standard and process. The very first thing is that I'd emphasize that it is an outcomes-based process, that really what we're concerned with is the knowledge, the skills and the abilities of engineering graduates the day they walk out of college. Our process then is that we bring together a visiting panel, so that would include representatives of industry and other academics. We would review the evidence coming out of those engineering programs. We'd interview the students on the programs, the graduates, the employers of those graduates, and then hold meetings with the staff who teach on the program. It is quite a broad standard, our accreditation, that we do look at the national framework qualification levels all the way from level 6 higher cert up to level 9 masters. We cover as well all of the universities, the TUs, the IoT, and we cover all engineering disciplines. It's something that we've been doing for quite some time now, so we are heavily experienced in accreditation, running for over 40 years, and we do have approximately 200 accredited programs, again, across the engineering disciplines. I suppose trying to summarize then the benefits of our accreditation in just 3 points. The first would be is that it's essentially a quality assurance mechanism that's carried out to established international standards, and then does have quite a lot of industry input in terms of how we develop our criteria. Secondly, that our accreditation does establish the eligibility of graduates to go on to achieve our professional titles. So for example, for the chartered engineer title, the education standard is an accredited master's. Similarly, then for the associate engineer title is a level 7 bachelor's, and an engineering technician is a level 6 higher cert. Of course, that would be after they would have developed their engineering experience, their professional competence on top of their accredited qualification. And then thirdly, but by no means least, is the international mobility that our accreditation brings. So just to give you a snapshot, that this is quite important to us, that we spend quite a lot of time engaging with our international sister organizations as part of the International Engineering Alliance. So that would include accords like the Washington Accord and the European Network for the Accreditation of Engineering Education at the European level. And again, that's all about bringing an international benchmark to engineering education and opening up international mobility, both for our graduates to go abroad, but also then welcoming in engineers from abroad to overcome some of the skills shortages we currently face. So then moving on specifically to our accreditation criteria. As I said, this is an outcomes-based process. What we're looking at is, what do graduates know, what can they do, what can they understand the day they walk out of college. So if you look at our accreditation criteria, really the core are our program outcomes. So these are the 8 program outcomes that each program needs to demonstrate that they achieve. There are some other criteria in there, but really the core is these program outcomes. So again, those cover the knowledge and understanding of, say, fundamentals of engineering and science and so on, analyzing problems, designing solutions, investigation and research, ethics, teamwork, and communications. They, I think, are quite well established and have evolved over the course of many years. But we did introduce this new program outcome, P08, on engineering management in the latest iteration of the accreditation criteria published in January 2021. While it is a new program outcome, certain subcomponents of it did exist in some of the previous program outcomes. For example, we did take some from communications, some from ethics, but really we did want to elevate that importance of engineering management, of course, that we'll hear all about today. That review as well was based on quite a lot of input that we got from industry, from engineering graduates of how they found their careers to develop, and then of course from engineering academics and our own boards here in Engineers Ireland. So then just to look into that program outcome in a little bit more depth, that the headline of the outcome is that the graduates of a program, that they should have knowledge and understanding of engineering management principles, financial decision-making, that should be relevant to their branch of engineering, and an ability to apply these to one's own work and to the management of projects. So then just a quick snapshot then on what I just read out there was at the master's level or the chartered engineer level. But of course, in Engineers Ireland, as I said, we do cover the levels all the way from level 6 higher cert up to level 9 masters. So we do expect that there would be a progression there through those levels. So at a 2-year higher cert, we're expecting a certain basic understanding of some of the principles. But then as you would progress up to master's level, you're expecting then an increase in that learning to include, for example, more financial decision-making, better understanding of project management, and so on. So maybe just looking into the chartered level in a little bit more detail, we have developed what we call indicative graduate attributes. These aren't attributes that every single graduate must have, but these are what we think are indicative of a strong program in engineering. So the first covers organizational structures, commercial governance, and relevant legal principles and contractual arrangements. Secondly, then is the management of resources, including human resources. And then thirdly is project management and work planning and monitoring tools. So then just trying to maybe reflect on what some of the keywords were in that. And again, quite a lot of work and engagement did go on into developing each of those words that I called out. So one, and actually talking to a member of our accreditation board just this week, who said that engineering really is all about decision making. So I think it is about equipping engineers with those tools for effective decision making. Again, I'm sure we'll hear about some of that in our other speakers' careers. Secondly, then that whole idea of project management, that engineers moving from just purely technical roles into managing projects, managing programs, managing teams, and so on, and the planning that is involved in that. Thirdly, then is the whole area of finance. So I include this point here that we're not necessarily looking for accountants, but it's more an appreciation and a general understanding of finance, project finance, maybe aspects of appraisal and so on. Thirdly, then is legal. And again, we're not looking to develop lawyers as part of this, but an understanding of basic contract. And again, I suppose through all of this, it's all about the relevance to the engineering discipline. So engineering management maybe in electronics will be different to engineering management in a civil or construction context. So the program should really reflect on how that is designed to suit the particular engineering discipline. So then, as I mentioned, our criteria have been in place since 2021, but we're really just starting to see them come through the programs over the last year or so. So some of the examples of where we've seen engineering management embedded in engineering programs are firstly on the work placement. But generally, we do find that work placement ticks an awful lot of boxes for our program outcomes. When we interview students, interview graduates and employers, nearly all of them bring up the point of how rewarding and useful they found the work placement. And generally, there has been a move to increase the duration of those work placements or introducing other types of work-based learning into engineering programs. And of course, we have seen the development of more apprenticeship programs also. Then in terms of project work, of course, has for a very long time been a core part of engineering, but through a project, whether that's working as part of a team or running one's own project, again, the skills related to management that engineering students can develop, particularly then if you can introduce multidisciplinary teams. So that might be working with other engineering disciplines or maybe working with other professions. Again, in a construction context, that might be working with architects or surveyors or other professions. In terms of finance, I think introducing some costing. So again, that may be related to project work, may be related to their work placement, but generally an appreciation of the costing of materials or the other financial aspects of a project or an engineering discipline. And then the last two, I suppose, are slightly broader points. That what we have seen is the introduction of some quite specific modules that might be a module that's just called engineering management or a module on finance in engineering. I do think they can be effective, but they shouldn't just be seen as, okay, that's the module that ticks the box for the program outcome, that we would expect to see it integrated through a variety of modules. And also that those modules should be pitched at the correct level. Again, that's considered, does that fit more? Is it the 5th year of a master's or is it the 3rd year of a level 7? Again, how exactly that's pitched to the students. And then finally, research, of course, particularly at the master's level or the FYP for say a level 8, that there will be a research component that can be quite useful then for introducing project management skills, other management, managing one's own work and so on. So again, a lot of this is about putting the role of the engineer in perspective. Again, that it's not just about creating managers, but engineers that are able to work within a management context or may progress towards management later in their career. So then just wrapping up that, of course, with many academics in the audience, I'm sure the question will be, how exactly do we provide evidence of this when we come out knocking on your door for your next accreditation visit? I suppose the main ways really are in the self-assessment report, that's your opportunity to really wax lyrical about your program. Tell us all about your program objectives, maybe how they've changed to suit the new criteria, how you've embedded that within each of your modules or within certain modules, and then really to analyze the progression throughout the program. In terms of the evidence, of course, we are all about being evidence-based, and any claims that you're making within your self-assessment report should be backed up by evidence then, say student exam scripts, your module learning outcomes, your CA, and so on. And then finally, when it comes to the accreditation visit, we will be meeting your students, we'll be meeting your staff. Again, that's the opportunity for our panels to ask, again, how are you equipping your graduates with these engineering management skills? And again, of course, there'll be a presentation by the HEI management. So then finally, I've just given a very quick overview of accreditation and new program outcome, but we did run a 1-hour webinar in 2021, just after the new criteria were published. So we actually had Damien Owens, our now Director General. We also had Cormac McMahon, an academic who has come through a management academic background on top of his engineering background, who really brought us through that educator's perspective. And then we also had Paul Coughlin from PM Group that gave the employer's perspective just on what they would like to see engineering graduates have in terms of management skills. So you'll find that webinar along with a whole load of other training webinars and guidance on accreditation on our accreditation webpage. So again, would encourage you, if you're an academic applying for accreditation, or if you'd like to volunteer in our accreditation, to check out that webpage and to get in contact with us. So thank you very much.
So thanks, Richard. That was a lot of very practical and useful information for us, particularly when it comes to the keywords and the examples. I think a lot of educators will find that very useful. So next up, we have Jim Kelly, who is Director of Johnson & Johnson. Jim's a chartered mechanical engineer with over 30 years experience in operations, maintenance, utilities, asset management, and project management. He's also held many roles over the years, including maintenance and utilities manager at Janssen Pharmaceuticals and global director for asset management in the FM Centre of Excellence. He's also on the Executive and Business Society Committee at Engineers Ireland.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, so before I start, I just have to give a little bit of a disclaimer. This is really a personal reflection. I wouldn't say that it's a definitive article when it comes to engineering management, because there's so many different aspects to engineering management. But what I'd like to do is really talk to you this evening about some of the things that I've come across since I left college over 30 years ago, and some of the elements of management I think that would be very useful to teach some of our graduates these days. If you go into Google and you enter the word management, you'll come up with something like this. This is a Wordle, and you can see there a lot of the words that we'd all be familiar with now in our careers. I can't imagine if I was a student that I'd find that very stimulating. And there's only a couple of elements of this, I think, that are very important that they get a grounding in college before they go into their first role. One of the first things that I came across was the whole area of culture. And when I left, I didn't really understand what that meant. I knew culture was something that was like a national thing, Irish music, Cayleys, this type of thing. I didn't realize that there was also a culture in organizations. And it's a very, very important aspect of how organizations work. There's lots of different cultures. Essentially, though, what culture was, what I found it was how we do things around here. And that didn't necessarily mean that was a good thing. Some cases, what we did around here wasn't a great thing. But it's very important to know that cultures do exist. They're different in different organizations. Organizations are very different and varied. But one of the most important things you have to get a grasp of as well is that just because we've always done it around here like this forever doesn't mean we should in the future. We need to be teaching the engineers when they go out there to question everything and look for better ways of doing things. It's one of the most fundamental aspects of what we do as engineers, finding a better way to do things. This was a phrase I came across. I was, I think, 6 years out of college, and I went and I did a part-time master's in project management in UL. And it was a 2-year course. It was a block release course. We went and we attended lectures, we got assignments, and we had to do a series of exercises in project management in year 1. It was very theoretical. It was very good, actually, very practical, as you might imagine. Planning, scheduling, using all sorts of tools like Gantt charts, activity on node charts, all these types of things. I thought it was great. But we moved in second year into more managerial speak, and it was almost like a mini MBA. And that was where I struggled, because at that point, I really hadn't come across a lot of the things that we needed to know. One of the things, though, the psychological contract, this was a very interesting one, because we were sort of told that, you know, it's a two-way street. When you get a job, the employer and the employee need to meet halfway, and it's called the psychological contract.
And it's not just a matter of you turning up, doing your work and getting paid for it. There's a lot of other areas, as you can see here as well, that the employee expects from the employer and the employer expects from the employee. And understanding that and understanding that both sides need to fulfill that is very important for graduates and for young engineers, because sometimes they can find themselves in jobs that really are not a good fit for themselves, and sometimes they need to move on, and they need to know really that they're not embedded in one organization, that if the psychological contract breaks down, sometimes it's time to move on and try something else. Organization structure, there's lots of different organizational structures out there. Essentially though, I think everywhere we work is a hierarchy, no matter what way you draw it. And sometimes they invert the hierarchy, they put the person at the top and the bottom and they reverse it. But essentially, there has to be a span of control. You can overlay it with a matrix if you want, but essentially I've never come across an organization that didn't have some sort of hierarchy from top to bottom. I know it's a slightly old, archaic word, but that's how organizations work. And it's very important to know how that works and who reports to who and why they report to people. One of the things I think as well that I've come across, I've seen a lot of young engineers coming into organizations that I've worked in, and they actually were very good theoretically, but they weren't very good at organizing themselves. And what you need to really emphasize here is the ability to set goals for yourself, whether it's your yearly goals, your monthly goals, or your weekly goals, have a plan, and then essentially get to work and stick to the plan. And it's not that difficult, but it's very important to know that you need to organize yourself. It's one of the most fundamental things we look for when we bring in engineers into any organization. They should be able to organize themselves and organize a large span of work. There's lots of different ways of doing it. Some people use to-do lists. Some people, you can see there, use the graphical approach. Some people are just using a very simple, what do I have to do now? What do I have to do tomorrow? And then what comes after that? And, you know, we've all been taught this one, you know, the SMART approach. The goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. I think that that's a very important concept as well. But organizing is one of the most fundamental things that we can do as engineers in the field. Personal development as well. Again, you can't really overemphasize this one. Every individual is responsible for their own personal development and for their own career and their own advancement. And they need to know that nobody owes you a living. Nobody is responsible for bringing you into an organization and pushing you through. That is a fundamental responsibility of your own. And in terms of doing that, you need to have a personal development plan. Now, some organizations are really good at that. Other ones, they don't do this at all. But you can see some of the stats. I mean, this is it's from Breathe HR, and they say 66% of employees have no personal development plan in place, probably because their organization doesn't actually do that type of personal development approach, and that those that did, they didn't really think that it was going to be taken serious. It was just a tick box exercise. Very important though, in the personal development plan, to have some idea of how you're going to get there. And it's made up, building a career is made up of a lot of different things. Obviously it's experience, it's your initial training, and then it's also looking at things like further education. I went back, I've gone back a couple of times. I went back and I did a master's in project management, as I said. I did a non-executive director course with the FT over the last couple of years. I've done numerous certificates and diplomas along the way. I'm constantly looking to learn something new. And it's a very important aspect of what we do. You don't just go to college, do your 4 years, maybe do a master's and then stop. You need to keep going. You need to keep looking for more education and pushing yourself, because there's just a load of things out there that you can learn beyond what you did in your 4 years of college. This is the Myers-Briggs. And this is an Enneagram. I would recommend everybody does some sort of assessment of what type of a characteristic, personality, etc. that they are. It's very important. Some organizations, they do it. They like to know what type of characters they have. The Myers-Briggs one is a sort of 4x4. There's 16, apparently 16 different personality types you come across in organizations. And I remember the first time I did this one, it was about 15 years ago, and there were 20 of us on a large management team came together. And for whatever reason, myself and another guy got ESTJ, which is one of the ones that you can see there. And for some reason, about half an hour later, after everybody, they put them all up on the board and everybody looked at them. And half an hour later, everybody went over and looked again, and he had moved out of my one for some reason. I don't know. He'd gone into another one that had 4 or 5 other people in it. Maybe he didn't think he was the same as I was. We were very different, but the rule or the result had come out the same. But it's a very good way of understanding what type of personality you are. And from the Enneagram diagram, the one that's there on the bottom left-hand corner, it can also help you to understand why you get on well with some people and you don't get on well with other people, and what types of traits that are in people that they may not appreciate in you, that you may not appreciate in them, and how you can work on them. So it's a very important thing to do. I know sometimes some colleges do it in college, but it's really throughout your career, you need to keep looking and seeing what type of characteristics you have. This is one straight out of the non-executive director course. They really emphasized the importance of how you behave in a board setting. And they said that the key characteristics and behaviors of thinking, inspiring, performing, and involving, they're all very important to bring people together, to help people understand how they should work together, how you should think, how you should form concepts, weighing up options, how you influence, how you build confidence in a boardroom setting. Very important. If you look at some of these here, that you can take these and apply these to all sorts of activities. They don't necessarily have to be a boardroom setting. And it's very important, the what, how you do, what you do every day, the activities that you do every day, as we call them in J&J, the what is also the how is just as important, how you go about achieving your goals. You can leave a lot of dead bodies behind. The how can be very bad, and you can have a very good what. Unfortunately, that's not good enough. You have to be as good at the how as you are at the what if you want to progress. And people sometimes don't understand that, and they wonder why they don't progress. Building relationships is very important. And this is probably one of the best books I ever read about doing that. It's a famous one, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's probably 60 or 70 years old at this stage. And what this is, and I recommend people read this book, it's very easy to read. It's full of great examples of how in his life and his career, he came across people that he didn't get on with and how he had to find a way to get on with them. And one of the most important fundamentals of how you get on with people is you actually show a genuine interest in them. And he said, if you do that and you get people talking about themselves, no matter how much they may not agree with you, eventually you'll find a common ground. Governance, I'm not going to say too much about that, but it's extremely important. And if you don't govern a company correctly, it can go in a very bad direction. We have all sorts of responsibilities, statutory, regulatory, EHS, quality, depending on what industry you're in. It's very important that people understand what governance is. Good governance, keeping an eye and an oversight on what people are doing and knowing what people are doing in your organization is very important. Because ultimately, if you're running a company, you are responsible for what they do. And then, of course, you couldn't have any sort of management training anywhere unless you were to talk about financials and understanding financials. And engineers, they can probably get a grasp of it, a very good grasp of it in some cases, but there's nobody who's ever succeeded in business as an engineer who didn't understand the financials and didn't, understand the importance of profit and loss. And, you need to try and have a profit as much as you possibly can every year. You need to have a strong balance sheet, and always the final piece, the cash flow statement. Cash is king. You can't run a business without cash. And there, sometimes people can get very bored with this type of thing. But I think if it's taught properly, and especially if you look at real life examples, When I did that NED course, we had to do a case study of a company called De La Rue. They make currency in the UK. And we had to answer all sorts of questions on their annual report, which was 200 pages. So it meant reading the whole thing and then going through it and sifting through it. And, you know, it was tough going, but it was very informative, because an annual report is more than just the figures that are in the back. There's a lot of information about how a company runs itself and how it governs itself. And that is something that I think you never hear anybody learning about or being taught, but how an annual report is put together, what is the elements of an annual report and how important they are to know how everything works. You know, pitching and selling your own ideas. It's not easy to present. You have to prepare yourself, and it's not easy to pitch and sell an idea. And then the more and more further you go in an organization, the harder it is to actually pitch and sell your ideas, because you're competing with so many other people that have really good ideas as well. So it's very important, I think, to teach young engineers how to present the value of what they're actually trying to achieve. And somebody said to me yesterday, they said that if you bring a very detailed plan with 100 pages as an engineer, you'll switch off everybody immediately. If you really want to pitch your idea, put it on one page and make it understandable for everybody, but especially put in the value of what you're trying to do. Why are you trying to do this? What is the value? Value proposition. And I can't emphasize more than anything, you have to be able to present. And it's a very difficult thing to do. My son is doing engineering at the moment. He's had to stand up in front of 40 or 50 people, and he said it was one of the most nerve-wracking things he ever had to do. But we all have to stand up and present at some stage. And it's very difficult in the beginning. And as I said to him, the hardest thing in the world to do is present on something that you don't really know the content of. If you're talking about something that you're actually familiar with, you're passionate about, you will present well. So if you're presenting on something that you're not comfortable with, you won't present well. A very important thing. You can't overemphasize how important it is to be able to present. And students should be practicing this first year, second year, third year, fourth year, continuously. And then, I mean, the final thing I'll talk about is just keep searching for knowledge. And I came across a very interesting book recently by a guy called Cal Newport. It's about deep work. And what he said is that in the world that we live in today, where there's so many distractions, and especially when we all have phones, we always seem to be just flicking back to the phone every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes. What you have to be able to do to get to a point of deep work is separate yourself from everything, from all the distractions, put the phone away, put the laptop away. And some of the most influential and successful people in the world do this. Bill Gates does it. Warren Buffett does it. They spend a considerable amount of their week on their own reading and writing things down, trying to understand, trying to analyze what they're doing. And you can't have enough of deep work. It's very hard to fit it all in because everybody is so busy, but try and spend a bit of time every week reading and not being distracted and thinking about concepts, thinking about the future, thinking about planning. And that's just a short personal reflection. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. That was a very considered and extensive reflection piece. I think it was interesting to see that there's a lot of crossover with the programme outcomes from Engineers Ireland, not just in management, but in several of the other programme outcomes, such as lifelong learning was mentioned in there. So yeah, it's very interesting. So our next speaker now is Billy Hann. Billy has a degree in electronic engineering and a master's in operational management from DCU, a master's in executive leadership from Ulster University, and has completed the program for leadership development from Harvard Business School. He's worked for 28 years in the Irish Aviation Authority, up to the level of Director of ATM Operations and Strategy, before taking up his current role as CEO of Dublin Bus.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Anne, for inviting me here today. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Willie Hann and I'm the Chief Executive of Dublin Bus. I wasn't always the Chief Executive of Dublin Bus, and what I'd like to do here today is take you through my journey at a very, very high level and give you a flavour for everything from my formative years, my early teenage years, through to my college years, working in the Irish Aviation Authority and Dublin Bus, some key takeaways, and then we can take some questions at the end of the presentation or during the question and answer session, which will be mediated by Amy. So going back to the formative years, certainly as a young teenager growing up in Ireland, this is in the early 80s, just, I don't want to be giving away my age, but it's in the early 80s. But it really started as a young teenager with my father. And every time I got into the car with my father, he had a key message for me. And the key message he had for me was, education is the key to opening doors, son. That's what he consistently said to me. And the first time he said it to me, I said, Dad, what exactly do you mean by that? And what he said to me was, if you can get a degree, get into a good organization, keep your head down, work hard, the world is your oyster. Okay, so this was his mantra. Actually, it actually got to the stage, every time I got into the car, he was repeating something. I was convinced the poor man had amnesia because he just kept on repeating that message. And of course, he kept on repeating the message because as a young teenager, we weren't really too good at listening to our parents, as we all know. So he changed his tact a little bit. And instead of repeating his mantra, he was a mechanic by trade, my father. He decided he would move towards emotional symbolism, or in my opinion, emotional blackmail. Okay, so he'd come in after working on a car for a number of hours, and he would hold up his oily hands, and he would say to me, is this what you want for the rest of your life? Because if you don't get stuck into your books and actually get stuck into your leaving cert and junior cert, this is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. Now, little did he know, I was looking at him and saying, yeah, that's not really a bad call, because I wasn't too interested in getting stuck into my books. That's to be honest with you. So he kind of realized that he wasn't really getting through to me because I wasn't really putting the effort in from a studying perspective. I was big into sport. I love my swimming. I love my football. I love my badminton. I love golf. Anything that was sort of keeping me away from the books is really what was driving me at the particular time. So he changed his tact a little bit. And he bought me my first computer. See, my father was big into the idea that electronics and computers were the future. Okay, now again, this is in the early 1980s. And as a mechanical engineer, he was obviously himself rebelling against mechanics to a certain extent, and was trying to get me to embrace electronics. So he bought me my first computer, which was a ZX81. And a lot of people in this room may not know what a ZX81 is, but it had a stunning 1K of memory, okay? That's 1,000 bits of information. The phone in my pocket that I have at the moment is an Apple phone. It's probably a version 12 or something, has 256 gigabits memory, right? So this thing had 1K. Now, my father had great aspirations for me with this ZX81. He thought I was going to become a Peter Sinclair basic programmer overnight. But little did he know it didn't have too much capability. So he promoted me to a Commodore 64 some years later, okay, which had a stunning 64 kilobits of memory. I can see somebody laughing, so somebody's been down the same road as me. Now, what he didn't realize with this machine was this was a game changer for the machine industry at that particular time, because now I could play some serious games on this particular thing compared to my ZX81. So whilst my father thought I was going to be doing a lot of basic programming, unfortunately for him, I was actually playing a lot of games and not actually doing what I should have been doing. Now, he supplemented that with another kit, and I'm going to get this out and put it on eBay and make a few quid. It was a 151 electronics project kit. Now, this was a kit which had a number of resistors, capacitors, inductors, speakers, battery packs, and a load of circuits which you could make and practice on. And that really did capture my imagination and whet my appetite. And then I used to go into shops like Pete's World of Electronics and Tomorrow's World in the ILAC Centre, shops which some people might not, well, certainly Harry, who's here and he's only young, but certainly wouldn't know because they're all gone now. Geeks like me used to go into these shops. My friends were going to record shops while I was going to these shops. So guess what I did when I went to college? Electronic engineering. The scene was already set. But unfortunately, my father, there was bad news there. I hadn't studied hard enough in my leaving cert. And I didn't do well enough to go to a university in Dublin or Galway or Limerick. So he was quite disappointed about that. But there's more than one way of skinning a cat, and where there's a will, there's a way. So I found Carlow work, you see, and I went down to Carlow and I done a national diploma in electronic engineering, followed by a diploma in electronic engineering, and then kicked off to the UK for 2 years to do an honours degree in electronics. Now, the honours degree in electronics was interesting because in the final year of that study, of my studies in that curriculum, they introduced business studies. Now, as a young engineer who was interested in building projects and building circuits and doing experiments, introducing business studies to me was alien, okay? And it was something I somewhat rebelled against within myself at the time. At the time, I was sort of saying, if I want to study business studies, I would have done a degree in business studies. I want to do engineering. Why on earth am I doing business studies? But go back to something Jim said earlier. It's actually really important for engineers to embrace the management and leadership part of organizations and the study that you need to understand that. So lo and behold, I came out of the UK in 93 and 94, back home to Ireland. I had a degree in my back pocket, an honours degree in electronic engineering. And of course, I was going to walk into a job, keep my head down, work hard, and the world was going to be my oyster. After all, that's what my father had said to me. Of course, that didn't happen at all. I came back to Ireland in 93. That was late 93, after the summer of 93, doing my exams. Unemployment in Ireland was at 16 to 18%. And to put that in context, there was no jobs, particularly for graduate engineers. There was jobs, funny enough, in the marketplace, but they were for graduate engineers with 3 or 4 years experience. And guess what? I didn't have that. So I spent evening after evening. We dealt with papers back then because we didn't have mobile phones. I'd go to the Independent on a Thursday night because that's where the jobs were, the Irish Times on a Friday night, and that's where the jobs were. I would search them, ring around, put circles around the jobs and say, I'll apply for that, I'll apply for that, I'll apply for that. 150 CVs later, 3 interviews out of that, couldn't get a job anywhere. Contemplating emigrating from Ireland, that's where I was going next. I was going to the USA, where the dreams could be made of. But my 4th interview was with a company called the Irish Aviation Authority. And I decided I need to do a lot of preparation for this because this is really my last call before I go away to the States. Not that I had a visa at the time, but I was working hard on it. So I went to a library in the ILAC Centre, which was run by Dublin Corporation at the time. And I found a fantastic little red book on air traffic control. And within that red book, it had a number of sections on it. It obviously talked about air traffic control, but from an engineering perspective, it talked about communication systems, navigation systems, surveillance systems, and air traffic management systems. Nothing of which I knew anything about, but it was really interesting from a technical perspective. So I read as much as I can and I went into the interview, and hey presto, a lot of the questions in the interview were around communication, navigation, surveillance, and air traffic management systems. So I really landed on my feet from that perspective. So lucky enough, in 1994, which was shortly after the interview, it was early in April 94, I was offered a job with the Irish Aviation Authority. Now, the Irish Aviation Authority, for those people who don't know it, they're responsible for providing air traffic services and communication services in 451 square kilometres of Irish airspace. So every aircraft that flies through Irish airspace gets a service delivered to them from air traffic control. The IAA, cha-ching, make money out of that. 80 to 90% of the traffic going from North America to Europe and from Europe to North America never land in this country, but that makes revenue for the Irish Aviation Authority. And as a young engineer working in this organization, initially as an engineer, I was providing support services to air traffic control. So they were my customer internal or in the organization. So if they had a complaint or an issue or a problem with any of their systems, I was on the desk that they used to ring initially, working on communications, navigation, surveillance, and air traffic management. Such a wide variety of systems. From a person who was interested in electronic engineering, it was a playground of systems in many, many different ways. However, the competitiveness in me has always made me very, very ambitious. Okay, and I went for my first interview some years after joining the IEA, and I was unsuccessful. And I said to myself, okay, maybe the interview didn't go well, but I'll go up to my boss at the time who had interviewed me and I'll try and get a bit of feedback from him. And it's important for engineers as well. If you don't succeed, keep on going, but try and get feedback, constructive feedback, and try and work on it. I went to my boss at the time and I said to him, okay, I didn't get the job, can you give me any sort of constructive feedback? And he said to me, your interview actually went quite well, but you didn't have a master's. And when he said that to me, I'm like, Christ, here's my father again. Education is the key to opening doors. Where am I going to be with this? I'm going to have a look at this. So he was very, very clear you didn't have a master's. So we had the degree in the back pocket. We had a bit of work experience working in the IA. Now I needed a master's. So I started looking at what master's I was going to do, because this was a gentleman who was working in the organization for a number of years. He had given me his words of wisdom. So I said, I'll take them. However, I felt at the time, the systems I was working on in the Irish Aviation Authority, I wasn't really going to learn anything more technically from a master's than I could do in the workplace. But what I did do was I looked at those people ahead of me, and really the promotional opportunities ahead of me were in the management area. Okay, so it was in project management, engineering management, operations management. So I was looking for something a little bit different from a technical master's. The guys who were competing against me and getting these promotions all had technical masters. So I said, maybe I'll differentiate a little bit from these guys, and I'll look to try and do something in management. And lo and behold, Uskal, who were part of DCU at the time, were running a distance education program, and they were running an MSc in operations management. It was the first year they were running it, and I seen it advertised in the national paper. And when I read it, it really resonated with me because it wasn't a pure MBA or a strategic type management masters. It felt as if it had an operational flavor. Of course, it had an operational flavor because it was about operations management, but it felt as if it had a technical flavor as well. And that really resonated with me. And I did it. And 2 years later, I managed to complete it. Thanks to Anne for correcting all my assignments. God love you. And but it was a real door opener. You know, I managed to get a number of promotions following that particular masters. And one was a project manager. I was the project manager for replacing all the navigational systems in the country, a multi-million-pound project, and done that successfully. Then I jumped in to become the engineering manager of the Dublin Air Traffic Control Centre, again managing people. And the MSc in operations management really stood to me there. It was a little bit like pregnancy. After 10 years, I kind of forgot what it was like, so I decided to go again. And I done an MSc in executive leadership, and I'd done that through the Irish Times and the Ulster University. And really, again, that was another game changer for me. The director who had been appointed at the time of operations gave me a call, and he asked me would I go in to work for him in Delir Street. Now, up until this, I was generally working in air traffic control centres in out close to Dublin Airport. So I thought about it at the time, and I said, really, do I want to go into headquarters? But this was a fantastic opportunity. This was a young director of operations, had an air traffic control background, who had rang me and asked me would I go in and effectively work as his right-hand man. And I said I would. And what it really did for me was it gave me great exposure and visibility to the executive team and the managers who were really making the big decisions on who was being promoted. Now, I was working really hard and delivering out on an air traffic control centre, which was really important, don't get me wrong. But the actual people who are making the decisions of promotion, they weren't really seeing this because they were working somewhere else. So visibility and getting exposure to that executive team, however way you do it, is really important if you want to get on. So thankfully, a number of promotions later, I became the general manager of terminal services, which gave me full responsibility for air traffic services at Dublin, Shannon and Cork Airport. And then after that, the director who I was working for kicked on to be the CEO of the IEA, and he still is the CEO of the IEA. And I got the opportunity to go for his position and was very lucky to get it. So for about 4 years, I was the director of air traffic management operations and strategy, which gave me overall accountability for the engineering elements and the air traffic control elements for the whole of the IEA, an experience which I really enjoyed. During that time, I did get the opportunity to do a program for leadership development in the Harvard Business School. If anyone ever gets a chance to study in Harvard, grab it with 2 hands because it's an amazing experience. Then in December, or just before December 2022, I decided to jump into a competition for the CEO of Dublin Bus. And I wasn't even too sure whether I really wanted this job, to be honest with you, at the start. But I decided I'd get involved in the process. And as the process got on, I started getting through various stages. I said, this is getting serious now. I need to start really thinking about this. And then I got an offer of the job. So I was 28 or 29 years working in an organization. In many ways was institutionalized, working in a semi-state body, in an air traffic control industry. That's all I knew. Or at least that's all I felt I knew. And I was offered a job as the CEO of Dublin Bus. So I had a big decision to make. The package wasn't that much different, but it was a CEO's position versus a director's position where I was. And my sort of ambition really took over. And I said, really, I've always wanted to be a CEO. I can't really let this opportunity go. So lo and behold, I'm now the chief executive of Dublin Bus. And I'm really honored and proud to be. And the Dublin Bus brand, come back to my teenage years and a young person growing up in Dublin, Dublin Bus was very much a brand I could recognize with. I can still remember being a young kid asking the conductor on the bus for a bus roll so I could throw it as a streamer around the green in my local area. So I had a great resonation with me, and that's where I am to date. Just some key facts about Dublin Bus. I've mentioned about the IEA, so I'm going to do it about Dublin Bus. We have 120 million passengers in 2022. Now that's versus 140 before the pandemic in 2019. Now we're already this year 6% above the first 2 months of 2019. So I expect us this year to knock it out of the park with regards to passenger numbers on Dublin Bus. So I expect us to bust our previous record, which was 2019. We have 2,800 drivers, recruiting hard. If anyone wants to be a bus driver, please reach out. We need you badly, okay? We need about another 150 bus drivers. By the end of the program, we'll get up to about 3,000 bus drivers. 1,070 buses, 121 routes. All in all, in the organisation, we have 3,900 employees. So it's a big employer for Ireland Inc., and particularly for the greater Dublin area. We're big into diversity and inclusivity in Dublin Bus. We have 76 different nationalities working in the organisation. And we'll probably end up having more by the end of this year. We have 10 24-hour routes, 5,000 stops which we service, and 8 depots. And in simple terms, we're trying to provide a safe, secure and quality bus service to the people of the greater Dublin area. So that kind of takes you through my journey, but there's just some key takeaways that I'd just like to go through. Always listen to those who are wiser, even as a teenager, okay? And I know we're all beyond teenager years, but as a parent, talking to my son, repeating my messages to him, he doesn't listen to me at all. He probably actually is listening. I just don't give him the credit for it. But always listen. There's always somebody wiser and more intelligent than you in your workforce. Don't be afraid to listen to them. And I would also say about that is don't surround yourself with people like you. Surround yourself with people that are different from you. Because look, I can listen to Billy Hann speaking every single night and I can agree with him every single night, but that's not really constructive to actually being working in a productive organization. So surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you and are going to challenge your way of thinking. Work hard, be driven and be flexible and be solution driven. Don't be going up to your boss with problems. You're only going to drive him mad. Go up with problems, but have a solution for him. He's enough to be doing with his own job without doing your job for him. So it's really, really important that you're very, very solution driven when you're working. Be visible to key decision makers. I touched on that a little bit earlier. Embrace further education, going back to what Jim said earlier. It's really, really important for self-development that you look to learn all the time and try and increase your skill set. Whether that be from a technical perspective or a management perspective really depends on what you want to achieve. Be tenacious and resilient. You will get many knockbacks. If I had a penny for every job and promotion I went, I'd be a very rich man today. You just have to take it on the chin, learn from it, and then kick on again and try and have success next time around. When manager leading, be very clear on the purpose, okay? So as a manager, whether you're managing a team, whether you're managing a department, whether you're managing a whole organization, you need to very quickly establish what your purpose and strategic direction is. And you need to communicate that very clearly with your staff, okay? So everyone knows and is on the same page and know what they're trying to do. And then over time, you can embed that into the culture of your organization, which Jim talked about a little bit earlier. Build relationships, communicate. Organizations, whilst technology and procedures are incredibly important, they're made up of people. And what makes people think is relationships. So you need to work on your relationships when you're in an organization if you want it to be effective. And just as an engineer, not all engineers want to be managers or leaders, and that's absolutely fine. We shouldn't be trying to push engineers into management positions if that's not what they want to do. So it's really important to recognize that. And another thing to recognize is just because you're a good engineer does not mean you're going to be a good manager or a good leader. You need to get the skill set to be able to do that. And that comes through further education and through practice. So it's important to recognize that. But what's also important to recognize is engineers can be excellent managers and excellent leaders, okay? What they generally do is they combine their logical problem solving skills with good emotional intelligence and people management. And if you can do that, it's a really, really strong combination. And engineers do have the ability to do that. Now, one other point I'll make on that, because I suffered a little bit of this as a young engineer, believe it or not, you know, I would look at promotional opportunities in my early years and I would say, I don't really have all the knowledge there. So you know what, I'm going to give it a pass. Engineers by their nature think they need to be expert in everything to go for that promotion. You do not. And I'll take it to the ultimate. As a CEO, as an organization, I don't know. I'm not an expert on every part of that organization, nor will you ever be, or nor can you be. You use the experts who are under you. So when it comes to the financial side, which is always a little bit more difficult from an engineering perspective, whilst as an engineer, I understand profit and loss and balance and all the concepts of accountancy, I would never proclaim to be an accountant expert. But I have a CFO. They're the person who's the expert, so you use them. So as an engineer, don't let not having all of the information or being an expert in every aspect of the job put you off going for promotion. And then finally, and I can't leave the place without saying this, what's happened to the apprenticeship system in Ireland? We have a significant lack of or shortfall in tradespeople in this country at this moment in time. Now, I'm going to go back to my father because I'm going to blame him on this a little bit because he preached to me, get your degree, get your degree, get your degree. And that's fantastic for those who want to go down that path. But in some ways, I think we've nearly missed a generation of apprenticeships in this country. And it's costing us badly from an Ireland Inc. perspective because we just have a shortfall. We're looking for 34 mechanics at the moment in Dublin Bus and we just can't get them. So we're looking at our apprentice program to see how we can make that more attractive to get people in. So if anybody does know any young people who do not want to go on that academic path, please give us a shout and get onto the Dublin Bus website, and we will be glad to take their application. Any questions, I'm glad to take them. Or Amy, if you want to move me on, that's fine.
So thanks, Billy. I thought it was quite inspiring to see the alternative pathway through your education, that we don't all follow the same exact route, going straight into level 8s and so on. Also very interesting that you mentioned apprenticeship. We just had an hour-long discussion in our committee meeting there about apprenticeships and how we can facilitate that also. And in fact, our next webinar is going to be Earn While You Learn, including apprenticeships, and that'll be held in about a month and a half. So I hope you keep an eye out for that. So next we have Pat O'Doherty, who is former Chief Executive of ESB, having worked his way up since joining as a graduate. Pat's primary degree is in electronics, and he also holds a master's in industrial engineering from UCD and has completed the Harvard Business School's Advanced Management Program. He's a Chartered Engineer and Fellow of Engineers Ireland, as well as Chairman of the National Apprenticeship Alliance. He's currently non-executive chairman of Maris Connect, a non-executive director of the Mater Hospital, and an executive coach of Presta Ireland.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everybody. And I suppose I fill this space between the formal piece of this and the Q&A. I almost feel about sessions like this, getting to the Q&A is where the real richness is. So I'll hopefully move on fairly quickly. I'm going to talk a bit about my career. I suppose I'm the elder person here, so maybe it's appropriate I'm bringing up the rear. I'm also looking at my career in engineering, kind of, I suppose, through a rear view lens. It's kind of having kind of stepped out of a full-time role, and it's an interesting reflection. So appreciate Anne and Amy for the invite to be here this evening. I graduated in 1981 in a degree in electronics and telecommunications, and I joined ESB as a telecommunications engineer, and people might say, what in God's name did you do, join ESB as a telecommunications engineer? But that was because I was interested in control systems, and Billy mentioned this, control telecommunications instrumentation systems, and ESB was leading at that time. I had other job offers at the time. Interesting enough, the other job offers I have, all those businesses went out of business over the succeeding 15 years. But so I joined ESB, and 30 years after I joined ESB, I became chief executive. So from telecommunications engineer to chief executive of a power company, 8,000 people, 12 billion of assets. At times I had to pinch myself and figure out how did this actually happen? What happened in the intervening 30 years? But I'll take a quick trip through that. So I joined with a real interest in control systems and telecommunications. And it's fair to say that joining ESB as an engineer, I didn't think much beyond engineering. I think that's the message that's coming from everybody here. You join as a graduate engineer and kind of things happen. And in my case, I was extremely lucky and extremely privileged. So I worked for 10 years in the telecommunications area. I worked a bit in ESB's consultancy, which was the forerunner to ESB International. And I went from deeply technical roles, really innovative, groundbreaking stuff, or as I thought at the time, into project engineering and project management. And 10 years later, I took a complete career change. I went into what's now the ESB networks, with no background in distribution engineering or power network or power electrical engineering. But I suppose such is the nature of engineering and the engineering development and engineering training and education, adaptability and the ability to move across an organization and across disciplines is straightforward enough. I started then working more and more in engineering management roles. And then another bit of a shift, I ended up in a strategic IT role, really large IT systems implementation, the boundary between telecommunications, business processes, and computer systems. And this was really about change and technology enabled change. So I was bringing my engineering, project management, and now people change, organizational change, culture. Jim mentioned culture. So now I was kind of beginning to be, and this was all kind of happening to me at the time. It looked seamlessly. It was just a kind of a progression. I'll come back to that point later on. I then went into a change management role. I led a very, very major program across the largest area of ESB at the time because of what was happening in the energy market, competition regulation, the separation of ESB into separate functions. I led a huge change program around that, which had a huge industrial relations negotiations component to it. Not unusual for engineers to find themselves, again, in complex organizations in those kind of roles. And so that was and then I went from there into a very senior leadership role, managing 3,000 staff directly, national role. And then a complete career change out of the networks business into the generation business. So now as telecommunications engineer with no background in deep network electrical engineer, you're now going into the generation business with no background whatsoever in power generation engineering and turbine engineering or anything like that. But of course, I was going in there as a business manager. So I was leading a joint venture. So in the previous role, I had 3,000 staff and a huge budget. In this one, I had 25 staff managing a power plant with €1 billion of assets. But heavily dependent on engineers who knew their stuff around power plant. I didn't, that wasn't me. So again, it's not unusual for engineers as they work their way through their career to find themselves managing and working with other engineers who provide the expertise to actually, whether it's to run plant or to run businesses or to build. So that was a complete career change. I then became head of the generation business in ESB. So started off as a telecommunications engineer, became head of the power generation business around 2005. And then in 2011, I became chief executive of ESB. So if you kind of look at my career as an engineer from engineering, so I came in as a graduate, I worked as an engineer. I migrated to engineering management. So that's working with and managing other engineers on engineering projects and programs. Went from there into change management, from there into general management and business management. You know, this is the genesis now of a leadership role. And leadership is all about people, it's about culture, it's about, you know, the word that goes with leadership is followership. So leaders and followers. And then into the ultimate leadership role in ESB, which is the CEO role. That was kind of my progression, if you like, from engineer to a very, very senior leadership role. And if you kind of think about it, you know, so Billy and Jim mentioned lifelong learning. So your learning doesn't stop coming out of college. So I came in with a primary degree. About 7 years after doing my primary degree, I started a master's in what was then industrial engineering. You see, I think it's now more appropriately called engineering management, but it was actually a postgraduate degree in engineering management. And it starts to expose you then to a lot of the management issues. I think that Jim talked about organization models, culture, you know, things that you don't do in engineering school, and yet you land in an organization expected to kind of work and operate in that environment. So I did my master's over 2 years between 87 and 89. But, you know, there's more to, you know, development happens and should happen over the course of your career in a lifelong sense. And it can be formal, it can be informal. A lot of the development is on the job as well. So moving into different roles, been challenged in different roles, and been exposed, if you like, and been supported and mentored to do different things is all part of the learning and development. And in ESB, you know, it's privilege and happy. It's a hallmark of ESB that this happens. By the time I became the head of the generation business in ESB, which was one level below the chief executive, I had 8 different roles over a period of about 25 years. So 8 different roles I can identify over 25 years. And I just another kind of so that point of, so I would have gone through formal education, formal degree, postgraduate. I would have done lots of other programs, job specific, and then ESB would have run its own kind of, you know, management development, leadership development. Some of them in-house accredited business schools, others would just be run by ESB specifically for ESB. You know, in terms of that migration and that progression through the organization, I can identify 4. A young graduate at a graduate induction program a few years ago before I retired from ESB asked me about my passage through the organization. It got me thinking. So I could, as I said, I had 8 roles up to the point in time I became an executive director. But I had 4 career defining moves, and not one of them was of my making. It's worth thinking about that. So that's something about an organization, testing and challenging and developing and mentoring people to do different things. And one of the messages I always had for graduates was be open to doing different things, because it's only when you get to do different things and try different things, and some may work for you and some may not. It's only when you get to do those things that you learn and you develop. And I would not have finished up where I finished up if it wasn't for those 4 career defining moves. So, you know, you cannot entirely plot your trajectory through an organization or through a career, but the willingness and the ability to do different things and open yourself to doing different things and be coached and be mentored and take a risk is really, really fundamental, and at the heart of, if you want to kind of progress in a way that's, you know, you can't look, it's, you know, in a way that you just can't plot the detail of. So that's kind of, I suppose, my kind of you know, my career journey through ESB. So just maybe flipping it a little bit, if I kind of think back in the subject matter this evening, and I'll try not to kind of overlap and maybe get to the discussion with some of the previous speakers. But if you look at this now from the needs of business and what business needs from engineers, and so what we need is well-qualified, well-educated engineers across all disciplines. And particularly in large organizations, as I've shown, the discipline doesn't necessarily matter. For sure, you want civil engineers designing foundations and boiler engineers designing boilers. Absolutely. And as Billy said, not all engineers want to be managers, and not all engineers go on to be managers. You want engineers doing engineering. But we want to, in its widest possible sense of the word, diverse routes into engineering. Mention of pathways. In another job I have for government is I'm involved in extending the concept of apprenticeship beyond the current craft programs to all sectors of the economy, and trying to get progression from level 5 and 6, from level 6 and 7, 5, 6 on the NFQ right up to level 10 through the apprenticeship model, not just in craft and engineering, but across in insurance and finance and marketing and sales and business. So pathways is really important, and particularly for employers now trying to find engineers and source engineers. Yeah, many organizations have a large base of craft employees, so pathways from craft through to engineering is important. But we want engineers with diverse backgrounds to work in multidisciplinary, cross-functional situations. Team is very, very, very important. The ability to work in, with, and lead a team from day one is really, really important. To innovate and to collaborate. We live in a world where collaboration is absolutely essential. To create and to deliver. Ultimately, in my book, engineering is about delivering. And it's about delivering against the age-old business constraints, time, resources, budget. But ultimately, we want engineers to work in an uncertain, complex, increasingly uncertain, increasingly complex business environment to solve today's business problems. And as I said, not all engineers will be in strict management roles. But even where we have engineers working in small groups and in small teams, we still need engineers to understand management and organization complexity. Because engineers through influence have huge leadership roles to play. And that's something that, you know, that should not be dismissed lightly. The power of influence and the power of people in an organization who don't necessarily sit in the management hierarchy, but are respected for their technical or their engineering, whatever other prowess or capability they have, are really important change leaders and in an organization. So we need engineers to come in as engineers and to grow and develop, not much differently from what happened to me. Through the organization, some will remain in engineering, some will move on into engineering management, some will go on into business management or on into business leadership. And you know, what I've outlined may be a large organization view. It may be specifically a large organization view, and for sure, small organizations, you know, don't have the luxury of having lots and lots of engineers, some to do specific deep engineering. And they need people who can kind of span the management and the engineering piece. But I suppose, both Billy and Jim touched on this. You know, when we came out of college and into the workplace, we didn't know what we were landing in. So, you know, equipping engineers with the wherewithal and with the knowledge to understand organization and organization complexity is absolutely, you know, the right thing to do. I suppose it's the question then of how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that with an underpinning foundation of deep engineering, bearing in mind that the engineering piece will grow through lifelong learning, and of course the business and management piece will also grow. You know, organizations are complex, and that's, you know, really put it well, it's about leadership. So, you know, you land in an organization managing people, managing ambiguity in the context of the culture of that organization can be complex stakeholder environment. Your own impact in that organization is something that, so a level of self-awareness about one's impact on other people in an organization is important. But ultimately it's about getting things done with and through people. And, you know, sometimes you think of engineering in a very systematic way: design, build, design, construct, operate, maintain. That logical flow doesn't necessarily work when you're involved, doesn't at all work with people and organizations. But that doesn't mean that it's any less important that those engineering methods, if you like. Your organizations have, you know, the hierarchy in an organization is complex. And even though the hierarchy might look very linear, there's all kinds of relationships that work. So building a network and building a network of relationships is important. And in a way, if I go back to my own route through a complex organization, as I moved through the organization, my different pathways through that organization, I was building my network. So that as I moved up the organization, in many cases I moved sideways, I wasn't always moving up. You're building that network. That network is what you need then to work your way through to get things done in a complex organization. I'm going to finish with a bit of a metaphor that isn't quite engineering, but it's a metaphor I used to use a lot when I was talking to senior leaders in ESB about the where we find ourselves. And it's based on a book that I would have been given by a consultant probably 15 years ago about leadership and change. It's a model for leadership and change, and it's called Building the Bridge as You Walk on It. Not a great engineering metaphor, I guess, but in a way, the organizations that we operate in today are complex and uncertain, and you have to weave your way through a lot of uncertainty. So in a way, you're building the bridge as you walk on it, which is not quite engineering, but nevertheless, that's the only way. You can't wait till step one is finished to design step two and then keep going. Sometimes you've got to move a lot of things in parallel, and that's not quite engineering, but that's what we need, is the rigors of engineering and the engineering discipline in that complex, uncertain world, so that we can kind of plot our way through that or build that bridge while we're walking on it. As I said, not necessarily a great metaphor for engineering, but it's one that is it's one that just, you know, it's when I think about business, think about the challenges of business today and how we as engineers, or indeed as non-engineers, fit into those businesses in terms of leading change and leading businesses in a changing environment. That's kind of a metaphor that I've always found useful. So with that, I will leave it and hand it over back to Amy. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. I think that was a really nice talk to finish on, because you referred back to the previous speakers and you identified a good few commonalities between them. I think if we created our own word map today, we'd probably have pathways, culture, operational complexity, we'd have people in there certainly, and lifelong learning would probably be another one.